Hi, YouTube. I am Theo Gede Parma, and I am here with my beloved friend Jane Meredith, which is pretty exciting because I hope you are seeing on the screen in front of you that there is this gorgeous butterfly leaf green tree book. And this book is coming out, I believe, on the 9th of July, 2022, through Llewellyn Worldwide. It is called Falling Through the Tree of Life. Embodied Kabbalah. And this is Jane Meredith's eighth published book, I believe.
Yep.
Good. So, as is customary and deeply important, here in so-called Australia and in many other colonized, occupied places, we usually begin by acknowledging country. So, I invite you to notice that you are a living, breathing creature as a part of this planet Earth. And you might just take a moment to remember that, to lucidly bring that forth by exhaling a little longer and maybe sighing a little bit and maybe tasting the roof of your mouth or licking your lips. And if you have feet on the ground, maybe you can feel gravity or just the fleshiness of your soles, or your sit bones on the chair or the couch or whatever you're sitting on. And I acknowledge that I am in Gadigal and Bidjigal country. And where are you, Jane Meredith?
I'm on Bunjalung and Arakwal lands.
And I acknowledge the elders past, present, and emerging. And I acknowledge the very real, continued, systemic and systematic violence against First Nations communities and cultures and peoples to this day. I acknowledge that this entire continent and Tasmania and the islands around us have been stolen by the British Crown and other imperialist nations and not returned, although some land has been. But there's a great deal of decolonization work that is needing to continuously happen within and without. I acknowledge the old people and the songlines and the dreaming and all that makes up country, which also includes not just land, but sky and stars and sea country, all of it. That's all country. I acknowledge all of that. And I acknowledge the Indigenous people in my life who've taught me how to do this, although I will sometimes miss the mark, often. And I acknowledge anyone who's listening who is a First Nations person, Aboriginal, Torres Strait Islander person, and Indigenous person. I acknowledge your strength and survival and your thriving and your beauty and joy and pain and life. So here we are. I am looking at my screen, looking at this gorgeous book. I'm going to stop sharing that now, however, because I want to bring up Jane Meredith's face. Yay! Hi, Jane Meredith.
Hello, Theo.
So, to be transparent, everyone, like we're very close, and this is very amusing. But I asked Jane Meredith to have this conversation with me on my YouTube channel because I enjoy these kinds of conversations with interesting people. Jane Meredith is very interesting to me, and I have co-edited and co-written books with Jane Meredith, so Jane Meredith's writing is interesting to me. And this is like a whole thing, which we will discover. The Kabbalah is a whole thing. The Tree of Life is a whole thing. So my first question to you is, many people may be familiar with your teaching in the world and your writing as well, but also a lot of us, like myself, are deeply curious and intrigued about what draws a person to mysticism, magic, spirit work, the occult. So I'm wondering what your answer today would be.
Thanks, Theo. Oh, it's a great question. You ask what draws me to it, and I'm going to say I never left it. That is my answer. Like, as a child, I did not enjoy being a child at all, and I did not enjoy being a human child particularly. I loved trees and the wind and rivers and the birds and the ground, like the earth. And I used to talk to those things and have conversations with them and feel held and loved and find meaning in those relationships. And I guess because that was, in a way, the most comforting, consistent, vibrant part of my growing up and what I turned to, I just really never let go of it. And I also, as many of us, adored fairy tales and mythology. And that was my reading of choice. And so I believed in magic. And when it became evident to me that, most people didn't believe in magic, that didn't really turn me off it. And and I kept believing in magic, and I kept believing in the voices of the wind and the holding of the trees and the comfort of the earth. And it just, that's what made sense to me. And so, yeah, my answer is, and I think like all children have very, if they have the potential at all, seem to, by choice, create very strong relationships with nature. And it
Mm.
just so happened that that was the strongest relationship for me, and I kept up with it.
Yeah,
So,
I agree. I think that, children, well, the fact is we are nature, and I think that human children just intrinsically know this to be true, and that at some point that changes. So that is the answer that makes sense. It is an answer that is deeply satisfactory. I think it's also a provocative answer because I think in Western society, we often, like to section things out. But that's like truly like, yep, a grounded Jane Meredith answer. So thank you for that. So then extending through that then, because I know that you are someone who's deeply experimental, you're into innovation, you're into, well, let's just experiment and try this. And so therefore you have tasted, been involved in, participated in all kinds of groups, networks, traditions, styles of magic and ritual. So I guess then, what is the journey for you to this mystical Jewish philosophy, cosmology, Kabbalah? What brought you into that? What's that journey for you?
well, first I would like to say and to acknowledge that half of my ancestry is Jewish. And so, and on the whole, it's the half that I pay less attention to. Like, I'm more outspoken and more visibly drawn to the French side of my ancestry. But the Jewish side is the other side. And so that was sitting there, has always been sitting there, within me as me. And then as this very young child that we were just talking about, who was so close to nature, I had this burning, passionate demand of life and of the earth about why. Like, why do I have to exist? Why am I alive? Why do we do this thing? Why is this thing happening? And by this thing, I mean life. And that also really never left me. That desire to know, to actually understand, to get the answer, like the actual answer. And I felt like that there were clues along the way. Obviously I'm a big reader. I did a lot of reading, a lot of observing, a lot of, as you say, experimenting and testing things out. And I felt like along that journey, I always got clues, and some of the clues in my dreams, especially, one of the clues was geometry. I'm not a mathematician. I'm not into maths at all, but like the geometry of things, like it kept kind of, I know this is a clue. I know this is a clue. I don't know how to read it. I don't know what to do with it, but I know this is a clue. Forests. I always thought trees and forests, that's a big, big clue. Sex and sensuality, but sex in particular. I always thought, this is a clue. This is a clue. And there were a few other clues as well, but how do you put them together? Sex and geometry and forests. Well, in fact, the Kabbalah puts them together. Or they never left each other there. All aspects of the same. And as you say, I'm a bit of an experimental person. I think I just like doing my own thing. And sometimes people are kind enough or interested enough to come along on the journey with me. And so the Kabbalah was something that I had read about, as you do. And I'd read a few books, specifically Kabbalah books, which didn't make much sense to me. And obviously I'd read many references to it. And I wanted to kind of crack it, to find a way to at least comprehend what it was about. And then I realized that the way that I understand basically everything, like mythology, the Iron Pentacle, elements of magic, whatever it is by doing it physically, like by putting my body in there and letting my body teach me. And so I was lucky enough to have access to this really big wooden floor. And I got some chalk and I physically drew out the tree of life,
Yeah.
quite large, like over, I don't know, 7 or 8 meters, with big Sephiroth, like this big enough to put a person in, basically. And then I invited 9 friends and associates to undergo a year's worth of journeying with me in the tree, and we went and physically stood in the tree,
Yeah.
and I started to get it, and
Yeah.
all of that other stuff started to come through, and not at the very beginning, but pretty soon afterwards, I was like, oh, this is the answer. This is actually it. This is what I have always searched for. I haven't got it yet, while I was beginning, but I feel like, oh, I'm on the path. Like these things have come together: geometry, trees, sex. Like here it all is. And yeah, doing that journeying for that first year opened the door of the tree of life to me, and as a way to do it. And I must say, like any serious Kabbalist that I talked to along the way, I stopped talking to them because everyone who I said what I was doing, they were like, oh, you can't do that. Oh, no, people should never do that. Humans can't do that. And I was doing it, so I just kind of, did my own thing, really.
I mean, to me, I know you would say this differently, but to me, that is uber traditional magic, because any kind of magic usually upsets or transgresses like social taboos. And so this idea that, you're in, like you once said to me that nothing that we experience, like all that we experience happens through the body. Because it can't not. And you and I think, share a very particular bond there. Like definitely we are both very passionate about communicating that constantly in different ways. And so to me, it's kind of obvious that that would be the way, but I do think it's revolutionary and radical because so many of us in the West who are interested in magic and the occult, and who practice this stuff, we have picked up a book that comes out of like the Hermetic Kabbalah Golden Dawn thing. And it can come across as very conceptual, as very abstract, as very like quote unquote serious, and you must abide by this and this, and to me it's like, well, I am God, like, and so I'm going to participate in being God. So that's what I feel like you have offered out as an apple from the tree of, I know the tree of knowledge and the tree of life are distinct, but
Well, not always.
yeah, it feels intriguing to me.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that's right, because it can sit right there in it.
Yeah.
So that's very exciting, and I am super exhilarated by how different people, including committed, disciplined Kabbalists, will take in your work, your giant work, because it's quite a large book.
Quite a large book. Like,
Yeah.
and I never thought it was actually possible to, even when I had whole books worth exploding in my brain and body, I never could conceive of a way that I could actually get that onto a page because it's so multidimensional. I couldn't think how to render it in black marks on a white page, line after line in English in a linear sequence, that
Yeah.
was readable.
Yeah. Well, and here's the thing, like you have this marvelous way of 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 softly but powerfully guiding us through memoir. Like often in your books there is memoir, and that is one of the most impressive, exciting things about reading your books, because in that memoir you are so vulnerable and fierce and personal that I, as a reader, get to journey into all of these what ifs, and I also get to taste the edges of an experience of one part of the infinite, which then impacts me. Also, you very I don't know how this was for you, but you sent this manuscript out to Rachel Pollack, and she blurbed this for you and endorsed this for you, which is pretty exciting because she is one of the most I think, one of the most exciting occult thinkers and doers. And she has radically offered to the world many times over all kinds of things, and so it's pretty great that she's right there on the cover,
I feel
saying,
very honored by that.
"Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah." So, I guess then, so you're involved in Kabbalah. You have these people, these 9 other human beings,
Yeah.
walking through this. Here we are, tree of life.
Mm-hmm.
On the ground and in themselves. And then it's like, well, then what? You're a writer, so maybe that's just the answer. But I guess what pulled you or pushed you or opened up for you to be like, I'm going to spend several years writing and dealing with this book to the point that it is now published or being published. So like what brought
Well, I
you
mean,
to
there
that?
was 10 years in between those two events.
Yeah, yeah.
And so much more journeying in the Kabbalah, in the Tree of Life, both with myself and various other groups, and I've taught it in different ways over most of those years since that first experience. And when I say teaching it, like teaching it is totally learning it as well. And I mean, you're a writer as well. For me, that was the book in front of me. And I'd written various other books knowing perhaps that book was somewhere, but I wasn't ready. And I mean, I still was never ready. I was never, ever ready for it. But then eventually it was in front of me. And then it was in front of me for nearly 18 months before I could start writing it at all.
Yes.
And, it's just taken up a great deal of time. And I had this thing about the octopuses, which is a very telling piece for me. That for all of those 18 months, I felt like there was 2 octopuses wrestling in my head. And each one of those tentacles was a different set of ideas or concepts that had to be included, possibly first up. And so then there was these 16 tentacles, wrapping around. And as soon as I'd start tracing one, that one goes back to, there'd be another one, or it'd be lost or twist or tangle. And so I just had this image I was stuck with of these octopuses wrestling in my head. Between all of those 16 arms, they carried like all of the concepts that I was somehow going to try and delineate on the page.
Yeah.
And I was so stuck with it. And then I had this experience where I was in the dentist's chair lying down, and they had a screen over my head, which I only occasionally looked at because I mainly had my eyes closed. And they were showing an underwater documentary. And there was these 2 octopuses on it, right? So I opened my eyes, paid attention, and they had subtitles underneath. And they were wrestling, like it was the thing from my head, these 2 octopuses, and the subtitles said that they were having sex.
Yeah.
Love.
Yeah.
And I was like, they're not wrestling with each other. They're actually having sex. This is a generative act.
Yeah.
And that beautiful piece of synchronicity, underpins perhaps my whole book. You can wrestle with ideas and concepts, and all of these concepts are totally wrestlable with. Like it's wrestling with God, it's wrestling with the brain, it's wrestling with the conditions of the universe, or you can make love with them.
Yeah.
And that softening and that turning and that kind of like, we're just making love here. Like we're just falling through the tree. We're just giving ourselves to it. That's all I have. All I have to do, apart from write 180,000 words, is just allow myself to be in love with this and to fall and to do my best to describe it as on my journey.
Yeah. I remember you telling me that story. And I also remember you telling me this story about you just being like, yep, here I go. Now I fall. And I actually do not stop. and that what you just said just then also reminded me of Jacob and the angel wrestling in the desert, and I was like, oh well, they're probably also having sex. Which is beautiful.
The other thing about octopuses, which I did not know until I watched this piece of this underwater documentary, is that after they have sex they die, and they only have sex once. And it lasts for hours. So I looked it up afterwards. So they have sex once in their life. It involves all 18 tentacles. It lasts for hours. It's very kind of involving. And then basically, the female one has these babies. She doesn't eat anymore. She doesn't eat after that. She goes away and she has these babies and they die. Really. So sex and death are right there like that with the octopus.
I mean, yeah, absolutely, intimately. Holy mother, that is super intense.
Yeah.
I did not know that. Now I know that. So I guess I mean, this is a thing you discovered because octopuses too are part of the infinite, as we are. So you discovered that. But what did you discover, I guess, about in this writing process, in this making love with the Kabbalah, the Tree of Life, in this whole process of book writing and book editing and book summoning? What did you discover about yourself as a human Jane Meredith?
Yeah. I mean, I've discovered many things through working with the Kabbalah that perhaps are different than the things of writing it.
Yeah.
So as I was writing it, the pandemic began, COVID pandemic, and I happened to be up here in my somewhat remote, often slightly too remote house, and so I was able to live a very isolated life because I realized right at the beginning that I couldn't die unless the book was finished. And so I had that pounding through my head like I must finish this book. Like this is my life work and I cannot die now. Like I actually have to finish this book. Um, and that got me through a whole lot of things, and I also thought, well, I have to be in a relatively good kind of mental emotional state to be able to write this book, and physical. And so like I lived my life during that time as if I was in a workshop every day. And that was actually great. Probably I should do that every day really, but anyway, I did it for writing the book. uh, it told me that this impossible thing, it was so impossible to write this Kabbalah book, so utterly impossible. And it showed me that I could do this impossible thing. I don't know that I could ever do it again. Hopefully, I don't need to. The other books that I've written have seemed, whole in themselves, and then I came to put them down on the page. Maybe
Hmm.
they had a few stray ends or loose edges.
Hmm.
Whereas this one really still retained the octopus's tentacles throughout, and the most I could often do was kind of point to, oh yeah, there's one over there. Oh, I think this one at this moment is doing that, but maybe not. Um, I guess it taught me how to be like the infinite and the universe and not just completely crumble and give way before it, to show up to it, maybe. Um, and I also did a thing with this book that I've never done with any other book, which is I wrote it sequentially from the beginning to the end because I had
Wow.
such trouble holding all the concepts in my head. I know. You're familiar with my writing style.
Hmm.
I could not write it any other way. I wrote it 1,000 words a day, and that's all. Often that took me hours. Sometimes it didn't take, it only took an hour. But I would not let myself write more than 1,000 a day. That's all I could kind of hold in my head to get down on the page was 1,000 words a day, and I couldn't jump around with it. I thought if I start jumping, I'll just, there's so many through threads, there's so many things I have to follow and track and shape and be with. If I start doing it the way that I normally write a book, I'll be lost forever. I'll be out in the deep marshes of outer space and no one will ever read this book.
The octopuses might absorb it.
Well, they already had it. They didn't
Yeah,
need a book
that's true.
really.
That's true. That's that kind of unfortunate aspect of being human. We assume. I assume. Um, okay, you kind of went into my next question, but I guess I'd like to kind of ask, which is, you know, magical books are notoriously complex to write. So, how do you, as a writer, a thinker, an innovator, a teacher, a mentor, etc., how do you have a consistent way and process of writing these books? Obviously, it changed with this one, but what kind of methodology do you bring to writing books about magic?
Yeah, I bring what I think of as the spine, which is the contents page, and you know this if you're familiar with my writing. Something that I used to kind of dispute with non-fiction books quite often is that they would kind of like go off into this direction for a while and then stop and then come back and go somewhere else, and maybe they'd pick that book up later, or suddenly two-thirds of the way through there'd be a whole inset of a completely different section, and like the structure, like where's the structure? Um, so for me, the structure is crucial. Like I want the person, the reader, well, and the writer really, to be able to be guided through the book, to understand the structure, for it all to have an internal logic that completely makes sense. And so the reader can be really confident about where they are and what piece they're receiving and how and where to go for the next piece. how to do this. And so for me, and I did do this with this book, I couldn't have possibly written it without it, but I've done it for every one of my books, is the first thing, apart from all the inspiration and the notes on thousands of bits of paper and the backs of chocolate wrappers and blah,
Yeah.
blah, blah,
Yeah.
apart from all of that, the first thing that I actually write is the contents page.
Yes.
And that
Yeah.
sometimes gets reformatted or changed over time,
Sure.
things get
Yeah.
moved around or added or subtracted or whatever. But that to me is the spine of the book. That's what's holding it all together. And that gives me, and then I work out the lengths as well. So this book has essays, it has memoir pieces, it has
Yeah.
technical sections, it has processes and exercises. Um, and a few other things as well, and I had to know, well, how long are all of those pieces? So the exercises are basically 1,000 words each, the essays are basically 4,000 words or whatever they are,
Yeah.
the
Sure.
memoir
Sure.
pieces are basically 3,000. So then I can, when I'm writing the piece, I know what length I'm writing to and how it fits into the book, and
Yeah.
also I could say to my editor, it's going to be 180,000 words long.
Yeah. Okay, yeah. I mean, yeah, you are a very your approach to structure is very solid, It's very solid. Um yeah.
It's what supports me. Like I do
Yeah.
have all this random experimental, see
You're
what
a
happens,
Gemini.
fly by the seat of my pants
Yeah.
stuff. I do have all that,
Yeah, you do.
and I have a structure as
You
well.
do. Yeah, I mean, it's all in your chart. Anyway, um, I'm sure some astrologers are like, oh, I'd love to know Jane Meredith's chart, but that's a secret. Secret for Jane. Um, so, I met you at this pagan festival in January 2010. That's when we met, and that was the year I believe that Aphrodite's Magic came out. 2010, is that
Great.
correct?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. So that book recently got a new cover.
Yeah, and it's got an additional piece, a sexual healing ritual as well of a few thousand words added in the back.
Oh, great. That's amazing. Um, so I met you kind of just before that was coming out. And my impression of you at that festival was because I had not come across you yet, which is truly surprising because I'm usually got my fingers in lots of pies. But I guess it was right time, right place, really. But my impression of you was that you were this very passionate, fierce, I come and go from the word embodied, but embodied. I think at the time you would have said magician, but definitely priestess and magician. Like you had this command, and you have this command. And you've even been, I think, the magician in a tarot deck, in a photographic tarot deck by our friend August. Wolf's Cartomancy is that, if you want to look that up. So I guess my next question is, or I know my next question is, it's been 12 years have passed, really, since the publication of your first book. And you have then written Journey to the Dark Goddess, and then I can't remember what comes next, but you have this book about the 8 festivals of the Wheel of the Year. You have a book about local magic, the Circle of 8. You have a book about the Iron Pentacle with me, Magic of the Iron Pentacle, and then you and I co-compiled, co-edited Elements of Magic. You have this Aspecting the Goddess book.
Mm-hmm.
Have I missed one?
I don't think so.
Okay, great. And then you have this book. So in all of that, and also you write, maybe people don't know this, but you actually do write fiction, and you write all kinds of other stuff which may come to pass, hopefully, into the world, So this is your 8th published book. It's, technically it's non-fiction, whatever that means. It's true. All things are true though, I guess. But how has your 12 years is a substantial chunk of time. My question is, how have you evolved magically since then? That's my question. Since this first Aphrodite's Magic book, and maybe you haven't at all in your kind of way of speaking and thinking, but what has changed for you magically? Or affirmed magically?
I guess my confidence would be one thing. And I don't mean my confidence in myself, I mean my confidence as a presenter or a teacher or, in fact, a published writer. So that has really, I think solidified. I mean, as a child, like I read Greek mythology, and the one thing I was always terrified of, like the one thing I've always carried through my life like a burning sword, is the fear of hubris. Like,
Mm-hmm.
do not set yourself against the gods, okay? Do not be arrogant or full of yourself, or like that is the path to destruction and a bad death. So I'm wary, like treading into this question, but I am much more confident and assured, I guess. And I have just received so much positive feedback and love and gratitude, like especially for the Dark Goddess book, I have to say. Like, that is the book that I receive 10, 20 times, 30 times as many emails, messages, anything about as anything else I've ever done. And often those messages are from people who have been having a really pretty dire or shit time. So
Yeah.
to think that my book has touched into that place enough so that someone can actually write an email about it or send me a message or something, that's pretty amazing. So I feel really confirmed, I guess, in that, and therefore, yeah, therefore more confident. How has my magic changed?
Or evolved, which, might be different.
Yeah, I mean, I've done a lot of collaborative magic in that time, mainly with reclaiming, often with you,
Mm-hmm.
and various other people. And that has been really a joy to me, and I think I've learned a lot from it, and hopefully also contributed.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, yeah. I don't know that I've got a good answer to that question, apart from there is a piece inside me when I set off to find the mystery of the universe,
Mm-hmm.
why, the great why are we here? For me, the Kabbalah has answered that.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think there is a level of internal peace in me that since I was a very young child, I never had it, and wanted it. And to have met that somewhere, maybe in my early to mid 50s, that's quite extraordinary. And even saying it now, I feel like quite emotional and quite moved and like, oh, that piece of me that needed that knowledge, that kind of demanded that from the universe. I feel like the universe has answered it really through the Kabbalah, through that magic. And yeah, again, I want to say the word confident. Like, I can feel the platform of that. I can feel the substructures of that within magic. Whereas before, I was kind of making it up and it seemed to work, and I could get that bit of substructure I was on right there, but I didn't feel like I had the map. And now I feel like, oh, I've actually, for me, I've got the map.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really profound, I think, that feeling, even more than the answer, the feeling you're speaking of.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
And I've always been a person like people. I would watch. I was really involved with feminism and political activism, but then also with the goddess movement. And I would often watch or hear of people going through this kind of crisis of faith where they lost touch with that spirituality or with the goddess or whatever. I never really had that. Like, so far, cross fingers, I've never really had a crisis of faith. I've hung on to that thing from early childhood and I've just always known it and always felt it.
Yeah.
So this is like another, and I've had that certainty. And now I feel like I've got this intellectual, this knowledge kind of certainty, there's mysteries. The mysteries laid bare within their mysteries. Of course, they're still completely mysterious, but
Yeah.
yeah.
Ineffable is a word I like to say about them. When you said intellectual and knowledge, I was like, well, that's very Kabbalistic, isn't it? Like, just that there still is this knowledge Kabbalah thing.
Yeah. I mean,
And
the rest, as you said, we're bodies, we're part of it. Like, we're indivisible from the planet, from the atoms, from
truly, absolutely, yeah.
the Big Bang, from the stars. Like, we're indivisible from that, uh, except where we have divided ourselves off to be able to ask the question or receive an answer or a non-answer or whatever it might be.
Yes. And I think for me, and this would be a whole other video, so I'm just going to be very specific right now. I think for me, the more interesting question, like the why am I here question, that's not a question that's relevant to me. Like I guess that certainty has always, I know without needing to say, but the thing that bothers me is why do humans feel separate, act separate? Now that's where I go.
Yeah.
That's my path of investigation.
And I, like, there's a certain randomness in biological development, I guess,
Yeah,
where and we are, a tiny twig off a small twig off a small
totally.
branch of an obscure side part of life on Earth, really.
Yes,
So I'm willing to say it's a bit of an experiment. This is maybe it's an experiment even gone wrong, that this little twig kind of perceives itself, and it might just kind of drop off the tree because it's
sure,
unsuccessful experiment.
sure. And that would be the hubris thing, to tie back into the hubris, that humans think of ourselves as so selected and so
Some kind
important.
of end point. Yeah.
Yeah, it's rubbish. It's total rubbish. And yet we too are part of the ineffable sacred divine. Just
Yeah.
like fungal spores, ants, gases, mountains.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like,
And the atoms in our bodies, even though they've all changed, or many of them have changed and transformed through time, were actually all present at that moment that is called the Big Bang.
sure.
Like we were actually there.
Oh,
And
yeah.
so we're all it.
Yeah, totally. And I guess that's what yeah, that's it. That for me, I don't know, is self-evident. That's all I have on that.
Well, you and I are in agreement with that.
Yeah, yeah, that's all I have on that. So thank you so much. What an honor to have known you for this. Yeah, 12 years, 12 and a half, really, actually, exactly. But also, to have known you in the feeling sense for lifetimes, and to be so fortunate to collaborate with you and to witness you as a human being grow and expand and deepen and distill. And I do feel, as someone who does know you, that what you have done is recently is distilled something very potent and very magical about your offering, that the magic that only Jane Meredith can express, like
Yeah.
that. It's a distillation. Yeah.
Yes, it really is. And how amazing that it turned into a book. I just apparently, not that I have seen or held it, but
Yeah.
apparently it's in a book. And for me also, I think the most important thing about this book is, yes, it has my journey, my
Hmm.
answers as good as I can do it, my how I got there, my understandings. Really, I wanted it to do, and I hope it does, and I believe that it does, is offer the reader doorways into their
Yes.
experience of that. And so it's not an abstract read. Like it's a read that is like a invitation to step into this embodied magic, mythology, mythic reality, really,
Mm-hmm.
um, and experience that in a variety of ways, many offered, and make your own up if you feel, uh, to also experience Kabbalah not as some dry, obscure topic on the page with weird spellings and odd precepts. And someone recently told me once, very recently, a knockout bookseller, that in her house they refer to it as Kabbalics, right? Because once people start talking about it, they just kind of go off, and like anybody else listening to them is like, oh, that's incomprehensible.
I find
Um,
it a little charming, actually. Like, to be honest.
well, there you go.
Yeah.
But yeah, so beyond the Kabbalics, into actually what this might offer to anyone interested in magic, ritual, paganism,
Mm.
embodied reality, conscious relating, and being like a piece of the universe.
Wow. Excellent. So I'm going to put in the description below the links to be able to buy this book, the links to Jane Meredith's website, and the links to Jane Meredith's social media, so that you can, because Jane Meredith is often teaching as well, and you can experience her guidance and mentorship and facilitation as well, because Jane Meredith is often teaching through the miracle of Zoom.
A miracle indeed. And I
Yeah.
want to add that the book, there is an electronic version, but they're also creating an audio version. Like it's not
Yeah.
done yet, but it's kind of in process. And I know that because they sent me an email asking me, how would you pronounce these things?
Yeah. I was that immediately went to
Yeah,
pronunciation.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's amazing. That would actually be such an amazing way to take that book in, considering that Kabbalah is about received oral, like so much about Judaism. Yes, it's written down, but a lot of it is oral.
And
So,
when you say oral, like it's not meant to be just heard. Really, the oral thing is like it's meant to be discussed and argued and
yeah,
debated and kind of
yeah,
lived,
yeah,
really, rather than yeah.
yeah.
Thanks.
Passed in multiple ways.
Yeah. Thanks so much for entertaining us through this through this experience, Theo, and inviting me.
Yeah, of course. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.